hopefully live. That's not a good sign. There's no video.
Signal.
There we go. Hopefully that's a good sign. We're gonna hang out here until you guys tell us how the audio is doing. Hopefully you can hear us, you can hear me.
And you can hear me.
And you can hear Michael. And you can hear the music. And hopefully the music gets a little softer when we talk. If not, this is gonna be a train wreck, so.
We can also just turn it down manually.
We could.
Every once in a while.
We see and hear you. Good, good.
Balance is okay?
I hope so, because there's nothing we can do about that. You talk quieter than I do.
I talk quieter than you do.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is.
Sounds a little like the Parkway, but I can hear you.
Hey.
And the synth over it. A little like the Parkway.
The Parkway?
That's not good.
Parkway West or Parkway East?
Let's see if I can... All right, hopefully that's a little better. It doesn't sound like it's the Parkway quite as much.
What's the Parkway effect coming from?
It's probably coming from the air conditioner that's running. I don't know. Or maybe the pump on the fish tank. It could be a million things. Hi, everybody, and welcome to a walkthrough, sort of hangout, question and answer session, informal Voltage Lab 2 kind of thing. We don't have really any itinerary other than to sort of answer some questions and walk you through the different sections of it. I kind of thought of this almost like a trade show thing where you can come up and ask some questions and we will answer them, and otherwise we'll just sort of go through the features a few times and just sort of keep circling around through until everybody's happy and we can go to bed.
We can't go to bed until everybody's happy.
We cannot go to bed until everybody's happy. So I hope you're happy. In the comments, let us know when you're happy so we can go to bed and stop doing this, because we haven't slept since Super Booth. We've been working hard. No, that's not true. We've had a nap. I hope you checked out all the videos from Super Booth, or some of them. There's some great stuff from the show, and also the videos from Heimbach and Jorb and Bo Beats, and Robin put out a video.
Robin Vincent,
and I know there's more to come, so yeah. But anyway, let's do this. So we're gonna start this. Here's a little patch I came up with, and really the only purpose of this patch was to show that you can do stereo. And the way we're doing that is we are using the Florist sort of as a stereo course. Oh, my Danielle and the dog are coming in, so it's gonna get loud here. This is a professional operation. We're professional people sitting in my dining room doing professional videos. True Cuckoo did a great video from Super Booth as well. Yeah, Luna did a fantastic job. I think that was her first demo?
Not first demo, first video demo.
First video demo. Yeah, I think she did a great job.
Yeah.
You kind of threw her into that one, didn't you?
Yes.
But you have to get thrown in at some point. And nobody knows the touch controller better than her, so that worked out really well.
Yeah.
The ETA on posting the manual, for those who want to dig in, the ETA for the manual is, Jorb is writing the manual. He's had a Voltage Lab for about a month. He's working on it. There's like a Google Doc manual.
What percentage of done would you say that is, though?
The Google Doc manual?
Yeah.
the Google Doc manual has all the features in it, but it literally looks like a
Google Doc.
Looks like a Google Doc. So I don't think it's going to be more than a couple weeks. I suspect Jordan wants to get it done with so he can move on with his life. So I don't anticipate it'll take too long. If you do have a question, try to at Pittsburgh Modular synthesizers in your chat because it's easier for me to see. My eyes aren't so good.
And I can't see this screen well at all, so
Yeah.
we got to rely on his eyes.
Okay. So why don't we rip this out and make something that we can understand and sort of walk through the synthesizer a little bit. Voltage Lab 2 is fully patchable, fully modular, which means you do need patch cables to do anything with it. There's a few normal connections where it made sense to have them, but you definitely need...
Like 5 or something.
Yeah, you definitely need patch cables for this to do its thing. Let me see here. What can I do to get this going? That's 2. So this would be 1. We'll plug that into there. Change that to 1. All right. So this is your output, just so we have a attenuator on that, and we're going to go from there. I patch backwards when I do these. Do you patch forwards or backwards?
Backwards.
Backwards, yeah.
Not really backwards.
No, it's from the output
Yeah.
to the source. So we're just going to do something very, very simple here. We'll start with laboratory oscillator 1 into a dynamics controller into the output. And we can even just open that up. And let's see what we're getting. We are getting nothing.
It's this here is going where to the scope? The scope doesn't have signal, but
Oh, I see. We're getting LFO is what we're getting. Yeah, there we go. How snappy is the function generator? How close to no attack can you get? We will get to the function generator and go over it then. We'll go through all this stuff sort of left to right. We're going to start with the laboratory oscillator. There's some stuff, some digital stuff before that, but we'll get to that sort of last. From the laboratory oscillators over to the output is all analog, so we will focus on the analog stuff first. We have to patch in our scope again. So maybe what we'll do is get a longer cable here. Take our there we go. Okay, so now we have our oscillator into just a splitter so we can see it on the scope. And
why don't I hear it?
Oh. It's probably only coming out of one ear. Ay, ay, ay. I can fix it.
Okay.
Good.
Gotcha.
Yeah, okay, everything should be working.
Okay.
This is mildly complicated on our side. Could you adjust the scope? Okay, so starting with
What do you want me to adjust about it?
just the height of it. The scale. Maybe a little, there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
More?
Nope, that's great. This is like 30 seconds-ish behind.
Okay.
Okay. So anyway, we'll start with laboratory oscillator 1, sort of walk you through the features of that, and then we'll work our way over. So laboratory oscillator 1 starts with, we call the seed waves, and these are the sort of basic geometric waveforms you would expect in a synthesizer. You have your sine, triangle, saw, and square wave. Now this is a square wave and not a pulse wave. But we then have these waveforms going through quite a few different wave shapers to get through. But we do have dedicated outputs for our sine wave, the seed wave, which would be
whichever wave we've selected.
Yeah. And then we have a couple additional outputs. The first is AGC. So if we turn all these knobs down, we can talk about the first interesting bit of Laboratory Oscillator 1, which is center clipping. Michael, can you give us a briefish overview of center clipping?
The idea of center clipping is that it works on the waveform from the opposite direction we're used to doing clipping. Everybody's used to clipping the top and bottom of a... You've got AGC and focus. Everybody's used to clipping the top and bottom of a waveform to get harmonics. That's what distortion pedals do. But center clipping takes voltage out of the middle of the waveform, and one of the things that it can do quite easily is do that separately for the top and bottom of the waveform. And when we create an asymmetrical waveform, we create even harmonics, and we can do that under voltage control for either side. So this action that Rick is performing now manually can be done automatically. I can also introduce an offset into the clipping circuit as well. And that's quite pleasant in combination with other wave shaping within the source oscillators. Right now, just Oscillator 1. And one of the things that you'll notice, unlike other kinds of wave shaping, is that we affect not just the shape of the waveform, but also its amplitude, which may distress some people that we're sort of performing a VCA-like action on an oscillator at the source in order to change its timbre. Indeed, a lot of the ideas behind this circuit came from crude ideas about VCAs, diode VCAs, for instance. There's one in early quark circuits, for instance. And one of the things we can do to the waveform in order to, well, first of all, that's not a problem. Maybe we want to do this modulation as a way of changing the amplitude at its source. That's totally legitimate. There's no reason we have to have a waveform come out at 5 volts all the time. But if we want, we can push this button that says AGC. And then there's a loop within the shaping circuitry that forces or tries to force the output to remain at the standard level. No matter how hard we try to clip, it forces itself to have the average amplitude that we're used to experiencing in order to solve the so-called problem. We can go through different waveforms and see different sorts of clipping performed on them and get different timbres out of them.
It amazes me how AGC stands for automatic gain compensation. And it amazes me how good it is at rebuilding the original waveform, even when there's very little information left.
It is kind of surprising, yeah.
A few questions in the chat, and please keep the chat questions coming. The first one from Dennis Flex, does it ship with any patch cables? Yes, it ships with 20 patch cables. A nice little poster.
The poster?
It does ship with a little poster.
It's hilarious.
Another question from 98. Is the top half of the VL2 going to be available as a standalone module without the key controller, similar to the VL1? No, it's not. This is the way it's going to ship. You get both things, the case, the cables, everything comes together. I suspect if you want one half or the other, Reverb will be more than happy to consume the other half for you. But just as a way to keep the product line to a reasonable number of products, because we are shipping a lot of these, it made sense for us to make one SKU, as they say. Now, someday in the future, I don't know, but certainly for the next foreseeable future, we have no plans in splitting them up and selling them individually. Does the oscillator have the random seed function like Taiga? Yes, it does, and it's actually expanded because in Taiga you have to have a note for it to trigger the random seed. In this one, it will do it based on the clock. So if you're not using MIDI, you don't have to. You can still use it. So there you go. Okay, back to center clipping. Now, center clipping, it works the same for all the waveforms, but the sounds that you get out of it definitely differ as you work your way through the waves.
Yeah, because all these wave shaping techniques are, by nature, work on the waveform itself, which is to say they work on the instantaneous voltage of the shape of the thing. They don't work on spectrum the way a filter does. They work on shape. So everything that you can see has an effect. Well, that's a terrible way of putting it. What you see is what you hear. It's all about shape. You see the effect happening. I'm saying the same thing over and over again. Just look and listen. Okay, so far we've done some asymmetrical clipping on the thing. We've put it under voltage control, and we've added this automatic gain control circuit. And then there's one final thing that we can do with the center clipping, which is to add the focus control, and that subtracts the fundamental, which is to say the input frequency, from the clipping, and that does this, which is a kind of, there are a bunch of ways of looking at this. In some cases it will resemble a single stage wave folder. Very specifically, it'll give you frequency doubling under certain circumstances, which is quite pleasant.
And frequency doubling is something we're going to get to with Laboratory Oscillator 2 as well. But the gist of this center clipping circuit and the control over the positive and the negative sides of the waveform, in addition to the offset, with the automatic gain compensation and with the focus, is really a lot of these are a lot of sometimes very subtle changes, but when you add them up, you end up with something that is very different in the end, and it really opens the palette to physicality to the waveform, because it does, these are new types of sounds, and as you can see on the scope right now, you can get some really interesting modulations going with it.
And eventually, after all this shaping, they stop looking like a geometry textbook, which is really the point, is that real-world sounds don't look like geometry textbooks. They look all crazy, like the, coastline of China, or the edge of a ripped sheet of paper, or something like that. Real waveforms do.
Yeah. So, in another reason we have these shapes and ways to change these waveforms is because the next step in the laboratory oscillator is, in the sort of cascading wave shaping that we have in here, is our wave folder. This is the wave folder that we've used in Taiga. It's our 6-stage wave folder, and this does include, you can turn it on or off, the warp circuit, so you can warp the waves or not warp the waves. We have to pull out of the AGC and go into the main output to get in here. Now the AGC output...
I'll take the clipping out for a second.
Okay.
Do you want me to?
Yeah. Here, I'll pull out the processing, or the CV. There is, like I said before, there's a clean sine, a clean seed output, then we have the AGC output, and
which is the center clipped only.
The center clipped only, and then we have the main output for the wave folder. And the reason one of the reasons we have all those outputs is this wave folder, you can patch into it. So not only does it have voltage control input, but it also has an audio input. So if you want to use, say, the second oscillator with this wave folder that we're going to demonstrate, you can absolutely do that. And that's something that you couldn't do in the original Voltage Lab, but we wanted to open this up as much as possible to allow for some really unique wave processes experiences. And we'll get into, as we work our way through the oscillators, we'll show some really interesting examples of that.
Or for that matter, you can patch your trumpet into it, or your voice, or something like that.
Yeah.
If you want to shape any old sound, that's the beauty of modular. All you need to do is get the signal up to the compatible level and plug it in. So you want to start doing some folding here? Okay, so we're going to start with a sine wave because everybody loves a sine wave. And as we turn the manual fold control up, you start to see the tops and the bottoms fold down nice and smoothly, and then right about there they hit the middle, and then they start to do it again. So you're folding what you folded before and then refolding the folded, just like I kept saying in Superbooth, how you make puff pastry or samurai swords.
And the oscilloscope
is an analogy that everybody understood.
Well, you're going to get one of the two. And the oscilloscope is going to start jumping around here because it's not sure
what to lock on to.
Yeah, so
try to get a wave.
Use your imagination a little. But this will fold 6 times in total.
And then that gets quite, sounds an awful lot like square wave harmonics at this point. And like I was saying earlier, if it looks like a square wave, it probably sounds like a square wave, and then it's a lot like a square wave. It's some hard ringing on the edges. And it's totally symmetrical at this point, which means that the harmonics are going to be totally symmetrical. But if we change the waveform, we change what happens to it. And we're folding the triangle and we get some sharper stuff. Folding the sawtooth gives it that familiar sawtoothy folded sound that everybody loves. Very much the overblown flute kind of feeling on the sawtooth, I think. But then in addition to the folding of all the standard wave shapes, we've got an extra trick.
Oh yeah, the warp circuit.
Which is the warp circuit. All of the waveforms are available in their ordinary straight geometrical form and in warped form. And for 2 of those waveforms, the difference is extremely drastic and noticeable. So right now we're folding a sawtooth. But if we warp the sawtooth before we fold it, we get a very different timbre in the long run. And
I love that low frequency motor sound that you get out of it.
Yeah, it's nice.
Just chunky.
And what the warp circuit does is it takes the same harmonic content as the sawtooth, it just reshapes the waveform, keeps all the harmonics but makes it look different so that the the folder has a different shape to chew on. That's the sawtooth that's been warped. Doesn't look like a sawtooth, but it sounds like a sawtooth. Does that make sense? And the square wave, we can do the same thing too, because ordinarily when we try to fold a square wave, we fold its sides onto itself, like we were doing with that pretty sine wave, only now we're just canceling itself. You fold it strong enough and it does this cancellation thing. So we hit the warp button, wham, and there's a totally different kettle of dirt, whatever the expression is. Similar to the saw, but different from the saw. And of course all that's under voltage control if we want it. So we'll go back to the saw maybe. Just a little bit of folding. And the first oscillator changed those two. At the main output, those two effects are changed. So the timbre circuit and the clipping circuit are in line. So you have a combination of effects.
What I thought was interesting when using the positive and the negative center clipping, if you turn off the AGC, you're essentially able to fold half of the waveform because you're essentially turning the amplitude of the positive or the negative down, and then when you fold the waveform, what you're doing is re-amplifying it. So the side that you've turned the level all the way down doesn't have enough to fully fold. So you end up with some really interesting, quirky waves that way.
Right, so that's the nature of this folding business, is that things start to get complicated pretty fast. So now we have all kinds of possibilities for asymmetry and these very rich tones that we can't pin down a straight geometric shape for. Pretty neato.
I've described it as neato.
And all of these effects, of course, are voltage controllable, so we'll just quickly patch in something into timbre as a control voltage. So the timbre CV, we have a timbre CV and we have a center clipping CV, and let's just, is this thing looping? Let's just go. So now one CV is controlling the folding and the other CV is controlling the center clipping, and of course I can scroll through all these different effects. Very different timbres out of the thing.
Bill Smith asks, is the warp circuit unique to the VL2? No, the warp circuit is in the original Voltage Lab. It's also in Taiga and Taiga Keyboard, although in Taiga and Taiga Keyboard it's documented poorly. You get warp when you have two seed wave LEDs lit. It's in the manual. It was a late edition, so it was sort of an awkward way to add it, but you definitely have that built into Taiga as well. So you can get these big chunky waveforms that way. Oh, I like that.
And it's pretty too. I feel like you could make a hat out of that. It's fun just to look at this stuff. For people who do oscilloscope display stuff, you know, projecting these kinds of scope images would be a lot of fun to use these kinds of shapers.
I accidentally bought a laser last year.
How do you accidentally buy a laser?
Well, I thought it was a small thing that I could use in the videos.
Oh, right, the one you needed to get a license for.
Yeah, and then I ended up having to get a license, and
now you're on record.
I'm certified by the Food and Drug Administration to use it now, and I only use it once a year. We go to this house on the river with our neighbors.
Because the thing is so high powered, you're not allowed to use it in municipalities.
Basically, so we go to this house on the river every year, and I use the mountain on the other side of the river as the screen at night, and it's magnificent. It's absolutely ridiculous.
I'm gonna do something irresponsible.
That's wildly irresponsible. So you've patched the sine wave of Laboratory Oscillator 1 into the FM.
Yeah, because then you can get these pulsy, you can get these, if you feed back the sine wave output to an FM input, you can very often cause the sine to go super asymmetrical. But it depends on what the core of the oscillator is, how it affects. Okay.
That's nice.
Check it out. See? Very different. All things in moderation, except things in excess as well.
So one other fun trick with the wave folders we have, and I'm going to jump over here to the effects section. Now the effects section utilizes both Laboratory Oscillator 1 and Laboratory Oscillator 2, and here we have a very nice sounding ring mod utilizing the two oscillator sine waves.
It defaults to taking the sine waves from both of the oscillators. That's one of the only places where there is an internal normal patch, and you can break out of it though.
But what we're going to do is we're going to take the output of Laboratory Oscillator 1, which is the center clipped wave and the wave folded wave, which are both under voltage control at the moment, and go into the second half of the ring mod. So we're basically ring modding Oscillator 1 with the wave folded and center clipped version of Oscillator 1.
And anybody who knows an awful lot about multipliers and ring modulators will know this, of course, that a sine wave multiplied by itself will give you a double frequency sine wave. That will be true even no matter how much we try to change the timbre of this thing. The fundamental will still appear for the most part. So we will reinforce the fundamental by creating an octave up. So this might be a fun thing to do where you send this ring mod version and the straight out to two inputs on a dynamics controller so that you have the ability to blend in an octave up, for instance, if you want.
Nice.
Also, if you, can I pull that out?
Sure.
If you pull that out, because the oscillators function at LFO speed, and the nature of a ring modulator is that it's kind of a super VCA, that it operates over all 4 quadrants instead of just 2. We can use it as a tremolo, put one into low frequency range and the other into high frequency range. And we've got a quick tremolo if we want that, for whatever.
You could also use it as a quick VCA as well.
You can use it as a quick
CV.
VCA if you put a DC CV in, it'll work just fine. If you want to gate something hard on or off, you send a square wave type signal in there. And then you can have very harsh on-off modulations like the paging beep at the hospital, you know, the beep, 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 calling Dr. Nickel. Somebody dropped a dime on you. Anyway, so
Dr. Herman.
So
Paging Mr. Herman.
the ring mod is super clean and available for all kinds of trickery.
Someone asked, Alex asked, do we plan on making more expeditions with the Safari modules now that the VL2 has been released? We do have a couple more ideas. We plan on continue doing the Safari modules as ways to experiment with for new projects. For example, we did the drum modules for upcoming drum machines. We did do a lot of the Voltage Lab 2 parts, sort of almost taken out of context as Safari modules. For instance, the Flamingo was a version of the center clipping. The Local Parks Oscillator incorporates parts of Laboratory Oscillator 2, but also includes parts of the cymbal circuit that you developed.
Oh, right.
So that we're sort of experimenting with different things. We do have a gate sequencer coming out, and we have a couple more ideas, but it's not really a priority for us at the moment. Is the FM through 0? On the Voltage Lab 2, it is not. That was from Justin Ritter asked that one. And Herman is paying attention. Okay, so let's move on to Oscillator 2. Well, that sounds very nice. Well, one more thing we have in the middle here in this effects section, we also have a bit crush. So here is the Laboratory Oscillator 1 is your audio source, and Laboratory Oscillator 2, or an external gate signal, would be used as the clock signal. And you can here as we reduce the frequency of laboratory oscillator 2. Start to get some aliasing.
You start to see it get that cool staircasey kind of quality where the number of steps in the staircase is determined by the rate of the second oscillator and the chopping that it does. So this is effectively a kind of a quantization of a live waveform. Not all that different from the way that analog to digital conversion works. And as Ryan Gaston points out on Perfect Circuit just a day or two ago, when we undersample, there's no reason that the program sound has to be audio rate. It could be a CV, so that you could chop that up and use that as a staircase melody generator, for instance. The crushing is, in essence, another sample and hold in addition to the dedicated sample and hold that's in the circuit. So this can be clocked by a live sound as opposed to the sample and hold, which is clocked generally more instantaneously. So enough on that.
Yes. Let's move on to laboratory oscillator 2. Again, we have our dedicated sine output. We have a seed output, which gives us the clean geometric waveform, and then we have our main out, and we will, let's clean up our waveforms here. That's very square wavy. We'll start with the square wave, and this one is a pulse wave, but it's got quite a bit more going on. Michael, why don't you...
You do it. You do it.
You want me to do it? Okay.
You do it. I like it when you do stuff.
Okay.
Because then I can laugh about it.
How embarrassing. So we do have pulse width here. As you can see, it's very pulse widthy.
I'm going to give you a modulation.
I appreciate that. And there we go. So there's our pulse width.
Nobody doesn't like pulse width modulation.
Nobody. Maybe raise the scope.
Bigger scale.
Yeah. There we go. Okay, and this sounds very nice, and we all understand pulse width. This is the Nick-Bat waveform of choice. But what we can do here is...
Did he endorse the square wave?
Yeah, I think so. I did make a case on Sonic Talk today for the Voltage Lab being not getting its due as the Monosynth award, but because I'm part of the team, I don't get to win anything. Anyway, back to this pulse width. We've added something called pulse symmetry. Michael came up with the idea. I gave it a dumb name, and I think it works. So what pulse symmetry does is it adds a step, a variable height step between the low and the high extremes. As we bring that in, you can see we get a nice staircase kind of effect, and you can hear, if we get it right here, you get this really smooth lasery sound, which I like.
And again, we adding more features to the shape of a waveform makes its harmonic content more complex, and when we're able to make it more asymmetrical, we have a tendency to include harmonics not just that are even, but not just ones that are odd, but also ones that are even.
Now there are 3 different versions of this pulse symmetry waveform, and the way we were able to do that is we can change what waveform generates the pulse wave with. So right now we are using the sine wave to generate the pulse wave, and that you can see we have almost a stair on either side, so that almost looks like a pulse wave. I'm going to say it does. And if we switch now to the saw,
you can see that it's inherently asymmetrical already because the signal that's generating the pulses is inherently asymmetrical.
Exactly. You can,
where the sine isn't.
With your imagination, you can say, yes, I see the saw wave still.
But it's a very crude squared off version of the sine wave.
Yes.
Square wave, saw, yes.
Of course.
Rising.
And then we have the third version, which is just a combination of those two.
More complexity here.
It is more complex here. And again, we sort of had it set at the extremes, but the idea with a lot of the Voltage Lab 2 is really analog synthesis is in subtlety. So moving through these sounds and finding sort of the spots you like best in the subtle differences between everything. Can you send an external audio source into the automatic gain control? No, you cannot.
Sorry, like we say in Canada.
We do say that in Canada.
When we're in Canada, we don't say it here, though.
No,
Because that would be weird.
that would be ridiculous. Dev for Freedom says hello from the Yukon.
Aw. Sorry you can't be here. I'm sorry to say that.
I'm sorry.
That was the sincere sorry to compensate for all of my horrible fake Canadianisms.
So,
I really am.
let's get back to it before we
Regrets.
offend everybody
Yeah.
watching. So, let's turn off our pulse symmetry for a moment, and we'll even turn off our pulse width modulation for a moment. Just go with a static square wave here.
Okay.
Whew. Now let's talk a little bit about, actually let's jump to a different waveform. Let's go to our sine wave. Oh yeah. Now, talking about the sine wave, this Laboratory Oscillator 2 has one more additional sort of party piece to it. Trick up its sleeve, if you will.
What's that?
Rabbit in a hat, if you were. It has a reflection circuit. Again, I came up with the name, and
Actually, it's pretty sensible, the name reflection.
one of the
It's a
few
lot better
times I've
than
named
full
you.
wave rectification, which is the standard technical term. So as we bring the reflection manual knob up like this, take that bottom half of the waveform and we're folding it up. Just like similar to the folding in the first oscillator, except it's inherently asymmetrical and it really only generates the one feature. It doesn't fold over 6 times. And let me turn the scale down one notch on that.
We had the soft clipping on.
Oh, we had soft clipping on. There you go. And now we have a full wave rectified sine wave, which has double the frequency. So people like that octave up effect, and you can have everything in between. A little bit or a lot, and you can have it under voltage control. And yes, it's for everyone. So we're going to go into the Reflect CV.
Oh.
Neato.
Not even legal?
That's cool. So that's what it does on the sine wave. It does that clean full wave rectification. And that's another one of these cases where we're getting octave effects. It'll do different things on different sources. Similar in the triangle case, but more harmonic stuff, nice and buzzy. And then what's unusual about, I'll just go to manual, about reflection of the sawtooth is that when we fold the bottom half of the sawtooth up, it doesn't get the octave up because of the shape of the sawtooth. Instead, we have a saw to triangle converter, which is kind of nifty. And then in addition, another trick that this has is this soft clipping option, which introduces rounding distortion as well. So get a relatively convincing, under some circumstances, saw to sine conversion, which is likable.
I'm relatively convinced.
So more flavors: soft clip, no soft clip, reflection, not reflection, and the pulse width business. And just like the timbre circuit in the first oscillator, the reflection circuit is available for patching something else into it externally. For instance, the output of laboratory oscillator 1, or something out there in the real world like your damn trumpet, or your voice, or your sister's voice, or the deer that hang out in your yard who want to talk into a synthesizer. We'll take the soft clipping out for a second. Just a little bit. And this control on this particular feature under voltage control is especially convincing on stringy type sounds or on woodwind type sounds, where you have an envelope striking it very quickly at the very beginning of the sound, and you get that quick octave up effect like an overblown column of air or a string that was hit too hard, where it gives that double pitch thing, like a lot of plucked and hammered strings do.
I heard you say that very early at Superbooth, and I stole that and used it then in every demo.
All right. We're on the same team, so.
Oh.
It's not, is it? I guess it's still theft, though.
Elizabeth wishes they had a trumpet. I wish you had a trumpet too.
Okay, well, let's, we could fix that.
We could start a GoFundMe, maybe? Perhaps a Patreon? We'll work on it.
So all of these shapings together, especially under voltage control, where you see we have voltage control of offset, we have voltage control of center clipping, voltage control of the folding, voltage control of the reflection of the pulse width, plus FM inputs, and then something we haven't touched on yet, which is hard sync. Where right now the first oscillator is trying to force the second oscillator to vibrate at its behest. And this is, again, especially nice for natural real-world sounds where one vibrating string tries to force another vibrating string to sing its tune. That's something that happens in pianos and guitars and other instruments with more than one string. And cool feature number 2, it can go one direction or the other, or it can go both directions, where the two oscillators are trying desperately to sync onto each other, and all kinds of cool, chaotic stuff happens under those circumstances, where they run free or they don't run free.
That's especially nice when the pitches are changing, whether because you're performing with them or they're sort of feeding off of each other. So that's the oscillators. Now
you get this sense, when that happens, you get the sense that you really hit a resonance in the instrument. It's one of those things that makes the instrument sound more like, much more real world like, because you actually hit these moments where the pitch is really reinforced as opposed to a little bit reinforced, and it feels like body resonances of a drum or a guitar or something like that.
True. Now I have to say, we've been listening to these laboratory oscillators. They sound very good.
It sucks.
But one of the best things about oscillators is when you turn them off.
Yeah.
To say is really important. So we start with a wave of just a folded wave using laboratory oscillator 1, and maybe we CV that just a lot less than that.
A little bit.
And then, we turn it off.
Oh.
So I think for the moment, we're going to skip the function generators.
Yeah.
We're going to jump to the dynamics controller and then explain this, and then we will use the function generators with this and everything. And so we're jumping around, but it makes a little bit more sense to explain this way.
So the sets of green knobs, and the gray control knobs underneath are two dynamics controllers, and dynamics just means loudness. It means ways of controlling loudness of signals, and there are two sets of them, two independent circuits that have mixing inputs, which means that you can send two signals into one dynamics circuit so that you can mix two signals into one volume control. And the volume controls are a little bit special, a little bit unusual compared to the kind of stuff you're used to seeing in synthesizers, the thing that you would ordinarily just call a VCA. A VCA simply imparts a loudness shape on a signal. And it doesn't do anything else except change the loudness of that signal over time. So if I send a sawtooth in it, it gives me the same sawtooth frequency out the whole time that the loudness changes, and it never changes in harmonic content. It turns out that that is not really, let's do that. So, oh, we don't have.
We do.
Do we have an actual? And that's what a normal VCA sounds like, and that's what most synthesizers have, is that kind of a response. What our dynamics controllers have, which is why there are some extra LEDs on it and some extra knobs, is a couple of other modes. And this middle LED, the one that says LPG, is the so-called low-pass gate mode, which simultaneously controls loudness but also frequency content. Specifically, it acts as a kind of a low-pass filter that at the same time that it acts as a VCA. And when it does so, it does something that natural vibrating things do, which is it changes in harmonic content over the life of its amplitude change. So it's not just a loudness change, it's a timbre change. What happened?
No, keep going. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Ignore me.
Hard to do.
Hard to do. We're in the way.
So the dynamics controller in low-pass gate mode does a cool trick. Where it automatically sounds a little bit more natural, like a real plucked string or a real struck drum head, because of this simultaneous change in loudness and also in frequency. Those two effects are married. They happen at the same time in the same proportion. And that turns out to have the sort of naturally kind of a sound that reminds one of real-world objects and not of VCAs. VCAs, like I always say, are kind of like cookie cutters. You roll out a big sheet of oscillator dough and you cut VCA shapes out of them, and from edge to edge of the cookie, it has the same timbre and texture. It doesn't have more features on the ends of the star-shaped cookies, and a low-pass gate changes in flavor around the shape of the cookie. What a great metaphor.
Can I get,
all makes sense now, right,
Can I have a
folks?
chunk of chips in my oscillator dough? That's what I want. Well, we had a question earlier asking how short we could get, how short the low-pass gate goes. So we'll just get a quick example of this.
Yeah.
This would be the shortness test. This is as short as you can set the response.
Yeah, so the top knob that Rick is touching now is the one that's labeled response, and response means how long it takes to actually close. It's effectively the decay envelope of the door that's opening and closing, the response, the tail of the low-pass filter and the tail of the VCA effect. So, and that's about as short as it gets.
I hope that answers all of the wonderful questions.
That's pretty brittle. Is that brittle enough for you? So we have control of response. That's tunable. We have voltage control over that response, which would be similar to what happens when an Indian drummer rubs the butt of their hand on the head of the tabla drums. You get those nice changes in the resonance effect. That's nice. And then finally, there's this option to add resonance. So then the two-pole low-pass nature of the filter in there starts to become really obvious. And it really acts like a resonant two-pole low-pass of the Salon key variety.
Which is the same filter core that's in the Korg MS-20.
It is.
Yes. And you can hear the very aggressive resonance. We've dialed ours back quite a bit, but
So I'm really attenuating the control signal so that you really just get the and a wide variety of timbres are available just here at the dynamics controller section. And you sort of see this theme that you have essentially control over timbre just about everywhere all the time. You have it at the oscillator source with all those modulation nodes where you're able to sculpt the waveform, get your hands in there and change its shape. But even at the dynamics section, you're intentionally changing the timbre of the signal and not just its loudness.
One other aspect of the low-pass gate mode is... Oh, thank you so much.
Hey, these are like really cool. Look at these cool glasses.
Oh, you're going to spill it. Oh,
don't you usually just hold a glass right over the synthesizer?
Ah!
Right there in the middle.
No!
And then I tilt it so the camera can see it perfectly.
That wasn't terrifying at all. Oh, another aspect of the low-pass gate is, we could explain this a little bit. The original Voltage Research Laboratory, the dynamics controller had 3 different modes. It had the VCA mode, it had a low-pass gate mode, and it also had a filter mode. The filter mode had the resonance and the pluck, and the low-pass gate mode had no resonance. You could do the pluck or not the pluck as well. What we found was that we could make one of the two sound really good. We could either tune the dynamic circuit so that the filter mode sounded really nice and lush, or we could have the low-pass gate mode sound really nice and lush, but one would always suffer for the other one. So for the Voltage Lab 2, we decided to sort of go all in on the filter mode. So the idea that the filter mode then was tuned to cover both low-pass gate and filter duties, when in reality there's not that much of a difference between the two anyway. But full disclosure, the low-pass gate mode in the Voltage Lab 2 really is the filter mode from the original Voltage Research Laboratory. This is something we also did with the Dynamics Controller BAT module. We just sort of...
And we stopped feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, we don't feel... There's no guilt at all. It sounds better because we were able to really lean into it and focus on it. But all that said, what I'm getting at is the Voltage Lab 2 really does have 2 filters. So and I did this in a couple of the demos used in the videos, where I would use the first dynamics controller as a filter and then use the second dynamics controller as the VCA. So you can do that standard sort of East Coast monosynth signal path very easily with this, and still get those very high resonant sort of acid type sounds. It does those very nicely, and they're definitely available. So that is that. Tuba mode. Yes, tubas. We also have in the dynamics controller, we have you have an input between A and B, so this can be, we're using just input B, which allows this to be an attenuator for the input, but you can certainly have an input into both A and B and then blend between the two. We also have a MIDI input where if you want to pluck the low-pass gate directly with the MIDI gate signal instead of patching it from the gate out of the MIDI into there, you can do that. It saves you a cable. You can use then the same MIDI gate signal to both dynamics controllers without having to split it, which is very nice. In the same way that the oscillators each have the MIDI on or MIDI off for those. The oscillators, and we didn't talk about this when we were covering that, but if you turn the MIDI on, then you do get the octave up and octave down functionality, regardless of whether you're actually using external MIDI or not. So if you want to set up the oscillators and be able to shift octave up and octave down, even if you're using it without MIDI, you have that functionality available to you. So Michael seems to have moved on. I will join him now as we talk about the function generators. Now, the function generators are sort of our interpretation of a circuit that, well, you know this story very well. Why don't you give us a 30 to 40 minute history of the function generators? The longer, the better.
30 to 40 minutes. The function generators are basically voltage-controlled shape makers, envelope generators. They're called function generators because people who devise circuits tend to think in math terms, and they like functions and things like that. The best way to think about it is that it's a thing that generates DC voltages that go up, and then they turn around and go down. And the going up happens at a speed that you determine, and the going down happens at a speed that you can determine, either manually with the big blue knobs, but also under control by voltages from the control voltage attenuators. You can also control the shape of the rising and the falling. And this circuit was devised originally by Serge Cherepnin around about 1974, or at least that's the guy who usually gets credit for it. This is the circuit that has been used by countless other synth manufacturers and has been sold under various names, some of which tend to hide the origins of the circuit. But I'm also convinced, actually I'm pretty damn sure now, that the circuit actually predates Serge because I found it in an EMS device from 1971.
What?
So I think Serge might have cribbed it from the EMS circuit, which was probably David Cockerell. David Cockerell was the primary designer for EMS in those days. Some of you may know David Cockerell for his work with electroharmonics. He moved to America and designed an awful lot of the electroharmonics guitar pedals. So far as I know, the so-called dual universal slope generator is an identical to the circuit that David Cockerell made in 1971 in this basically an envelope follower circuit with voltage control. Or I think it was called a slew rate limiter / envelope follower. Serge's version significantly tricked that thing out. So it doesn't just rise and fall, it also loops, which is to say that it generates a trigger once it finishes its shape so that you can start it all over again, so that you essentially have a programmable LFO with rise and fall shapes that can be determined. It'll also function in a sustain mode where it stays high as long as the gate that runs it is high. So that's great for like conventional keyboard playing where you want the note to sound as long as you have your finger down. And then finally, we've tricked it out, since we have two of them, so that they can trigger each other in a zillion different combinations. So you have very quick access to making them loop, and very quick access to, for instance, triggering the second one when the first one finishes its rise, or triggering the second one when the first one finishes its fall, or vice versa, trigger the first one from the second one, or both, or all. And those are done by starting, scrolling through all these different conditions, and those are labeled trigger condition on the panel. And that's a hell of a lot of fun. Oh no, it is, because you can then generate some really complicated envelope shapes, especially when those two function generators are combined in the generator mix section here, which will give you the absolute value of the difference between them, which is essentially one minus the other, analog or a mixture of them, and then an inverted mixture of them. And you can use those way the hell all over the place. Each of the function generators also has an end of rise trigger, or rather, one of them has an end of rise trigger and the other one has an end of fall, and a cycle input as well. So you have copious, as they say, locations where you can trigger them or cause them to trigger one another, and they can get into all kinds of really beautiful chaotic behaviors when you start to link them together. So you can have like a multiple complex envelope, bouncing ball type articulation, for instance, where something gradually comes to a rest but accelerates as it gets quiet, or all those things that that real world sounds do. You know, you don't drop a ball and it lands once. You drop a ball and it lands a bunch of times, and then gradually it comes to rest. All of those things are relatively easy to do, but the real, I think, thrill of the function generators, the way we've got them set up, is that they encourage exploration, not necessarily running toward one particular goal, but just trying things out and seeing what comes out of them, and it's quite surprising and fun.
Yes, the most double back a little bit. The most popular implementation of the function generator, the dual slope generator, is obviously the maths. So if you're familiar with the make noise maths and all the capabilities of that, everything you can do within that with the function generators, you can certainly replicate with this. Now we have our own spin on it that's a little bit different, but the core functionality, the idea of using it as an envelope, an attack decay envelope, or an attack sustain release envelope, or as a slope generator with independent control over the rise and the fall, or using, in more complex things, as maybe a clock divider, or as an LFO, a voltage controlled LFO, and audio rate LFO you could certainly do, although you would need to add offset voltage to get it into the higher audio rate range, because this does on its own want to stay in the lower frequency audio rate. But we do have offset voltage available for those types of purposes. We also have MIDI gate inputs on these as well, similar to how we have it for the dynamics controller. If you want to avoid using a few patch cables and just have the MIDI gate signal trigger one or both of the function generators, you can absolutely do that too. It's hard to sound serious when this is the sounds happening in the background.
So I did something simple, which is patch the output of one into the control voltage of the other, and then I did the same in the other direction. One of them is triggering itself, and the other one is being triggered from the keyboard. And then as I go through the different trigger conditions, I can get a bunch of right, so you can see a kind of interesting chaotic behavior. And right now I'm just doing the absolute value of the two, and I can go to the different combination. I get a completely different characteristic. Really encourage exploration. So I'll just go back out to the function generator 2, and I'll take the chaos out. So right now it's simply, wait, let's stop the trigger conditions. And right now it's just being triggered straight by the keyboard.
One of the most interesting aspects of a function generator is the difference between trigger mode and sustain mode. Sustain mode, it's almost like the signal that you pass into the input is processed and then sent to the output. So you can use it with, that's where you get the slew on the rise and the fall. You could send audio through it and it'll do something that you may find musically interesting, although probably not as interesting as you want it to be. But trigger mode's a little bit different. Now trigger mode has sort of one little trick up its sleeve that makes it gives it sort of its unique character, and that is once you trigger the function generator in trigger mode, it needs to complete the entire rise stage before it will re-trigger. So you can re-trigger it once it hits the fall stage, but during the rise stage, it will ignore any incoming triggers. So that's how you can get the clock division type stuff out of it, and start to use it in more sort of less obvious ways, but maybe a little bit more creative ways. But really sort of the control voltage hub of the Voltage Lab 2.
Yeah, so we're starting to see that there are an awful lot of places where control signals are generated, because there are an awful lot of places in the synthesizer that would love to see a control voltage, all those control ports on the oscillators and dynamics controllers. So you can get the whole machine talking to itself in a bunch of different places. Everybody in the city wants to have their own conversation.
Jack's comment says it sounds kind of like the teacher on Peanuts.
Yeah, she was great. I loved her. She was, no, I love that. I love that voice. I think her voice was actually like a horn with the toilet plunger.
That was what I assumed it was.
Standard mute kind of an arrangement.
Yeah. It worked well. Again with the trumpets.
Nothing wrong with trumpets.
We just get back to trumpets. Okay, so we're now an hour and 10 minutes into this.
Jesus.
We're getting there. It's all right. Please, again, keep asking your questions in the comments. We will answer them as we go through. I'm happy to answer anything related to Voltage Lab 2, and if I can't answer it, hopefully Michael can. Or we'll just make something up. We're okay with that, too. So as Michael is poking around with this sun, I think it's time to move on with what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So you could leave all that in, that's totally fine. And I'm just gonna take the output from what you were doing and patch it into the Florist. And then I will take the output of the Florist and go into the output here.
So as I start to open the door of the VCA low-pass gate dynamics controller section,
you can hear the highly tuned feedback of the Florist section. Now the Florist is obviously or maybe not obviously, I don't know. I don't know how well you keep up with Pittsburgh Modular, but we did a module a few years back called the Local Florist, which if you say flanger and chorus really quickly 10 to 20 times in a row, it starts to sound like Florist, flanger, chorus, Florist. That was the idea. And so I called it Local Florist because I thought it was funny to me. The tagline was support your local florist, which I found hilarious, and I put flowers on the panel. And like most of our modules and things that we do, it was an inside joke to entertain myself, and I got a big kick out of it. But anyway, the Florist itself is essentially a BBD delay line, but it's incredibly short. So we're going to run anywhere from 4 milliseconds up to about 30 milliseconds. So we have very short at the short end, and then we have about 30 milliseconds at the long end. But what you really hear in this, and what makes this circuit really special, is this feedback in how you have a significant number of repeats before it starts to self-oscillate. Now, if we turn it all the way up, it will self-oscillate.
It growls hard enough that it can growl without being poked.
Yeah.
So if I take the signal out entirely and turn the feedback all the way up, there, it eventually turns into an oscillator. But if we pull the feedback back ever so slightly, we can just surf on the edge of the feedback taking off, and that's where the cool stuff happens, where you get it nice and springy and resonant, and it sounds like a big long tube.
Yeah, so you almost get like a spring reverb type effect out of it if you are not modulating the size. You can get almost like a Carpless Strong type effect out of it as well. It doesn't do that on its own, but if you hit it with a nice plucky sound from the low pass gate, those two working together really, really get you into that territory, which I find really interesting. Now, we can voltage control the frequency of this, and if you were paying attention at the very beginning of the video,
I forgot to pay attention.
An hour and 15 minutes ago, you'll remember that we were using this to do a stereo chorus effect. I'm not going to repeat that now, but we will use the triangle wave here. And we'll check out the feedback, and you can hear now that we've pulled the feedback out and just set the size, so about 12 o'clock, and the mix about 50-50. We get a really nice chorus effect out of it. And if you set the size,
really nice.
Oh, it's really nice.
I mean, it's pretty nice.
It's really, really nice. If we set the size smaller then, with the LFO a little bit, you end up with something that's more flangery. And of course, if we just set our mix fully wet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you get really weird.
And those are essentially Doppler effects. We're changing the length of a delay fast enough to add to the perceived pitch of the thing. So we're changing it fast enough that we get the sense that the perceived pitch changes. It's like you're running on a train, but you also throw a baseball forward. Technically, the baseball is going a little bit faster than just the train. Right? And the same thing's true of sounds that bounce off of moving objects, for instance, which is how some sonar devices work.
If we bring our mix back in, it sounds weird in just a wonderful way. So that is the local Florist. I'm now going to unpatch the local Florist and patch into the Echoes, which is another analog bucket brigade delay. That needs audio. This one, the delay times on this one are from about 40 milliseconds up to 495 milliseconds. That can be almost doubled to nearly a second of delay time using an offset voltage. I've mentioned this offset voltage a few times now. I haven't shown you where it is, so I'll do that very quickly. We're going to use the attenuverter here. Now the attenuverter is normal to 5 volts, so if you don't patch anything into the input of the attenuverter, you get 5 volts out, or you get negative 5 volts out, or anything in between those two. And while I'm here, I'll quickly go over, you have an amplifier here that's 0 to 10x. These can act as a 2-channel mixer if you want, or you can use them independently, or you can amplify a signal and then offset it if you don't have a second audio input or a second voltage input going in. So there's quite a bit you can do with these controls. We call it the audio CV processor section. The amplifier is audio only, but the attenuator does both audio and CV very happily. So let's take this static 5 volts, we're going to run that into the delay. And as you can see, the delay time gets significantly longer, although it gets grimy and nasty, and you can absolutely hear the clock in the signal path. For those who don't know, a bucket brigade delay, it uses a clock signal to tell the delay how long to run, and as the clock signal runs within the audio path. So as the delays get longer, the clock frequency drops into the audio range, and that's the aliasing type sound that you hear. That's actually the clock signal. And so what you typically do in a bucket brigade delay is that you will run through a low pass filter to filter out that high frequency clock. Now, we've done that up to a point, but as you can see, if you double the clock using an offset, you do let the clock in, and that's okay. You could, if you really want a nice dark signal, you could run this through a dynamics controller, use the filter to roll that off, and have a very dark, very long delay if you wanted to. So you have options. Again, this is the Voltage Laboratory. It's meant to be a hub for experimentation. A fun trick with the delay is to go no repeats, full wet, set the time, not fully short, but close to short, and then maybe just a slow LFO into the time. Just set that to do subtle. And what you end up with is this sort of lo-fi cassette deck where the modulation, then you can sort of set the age and the wobble of the cassette.
Whoa and flutter, we used to say.
I never said that.
That's a tape term.
Oh, I know. I would call it wow and flutter.
Oh. Whoa. You really did call it? Maybe?
Wow.
Wow? Maybe it is wow.
It's spelled W-O-W.
Just like... Maybe you mean whoa and flutter would be W-O-A-H?
Yeah.
That's bullshit.
So this is a fun trick you could do, and of course you have the mix where you, if you don't want it all that signal, you can bring some more dry in, and you can the repeats, of course, to just get nasty with it. Again, a fun time. So that is the echoes. Now, we'll very quickly jump all the way back to the MIDI control and the chance sequencer, which are right now under our heads. So I will move us back over here and talk about that. We can take the pitch, will come out of the CV, and the trigger's going to need a longer cable.
Every time you put a cable in, I'm going to ring the bell.
Let's see. That's fair.
It's like scoring.
So what we have going on with the chance sequencer in the control sections, these are the digital sections of the Voltage Lab 2. The control section is almost identical to what's in Taiga and Taiga Keyboard, where you have your MIDI to CV, you have an arpeggiator built in, and you have your octave up and octave down controls, your hold, your transpose, that type of stuff is all in the control section. Then you do have your MIDI glide as well. This one does have the chance sequencer, which is sort of a pseudo-random control. The idea is that you set up a sequence length up to 32 steps, and as it steps through this sequence, that can be clocked by an external clock, or it can be clocked randomly on its own. The idea is there's a chance that every time it gets to one of these new steps, that the voltage in that step changes. So you end up with a signal that is sort of pseudo-random in the sense that it slowly evolves over time instead of just being absolutely chaotic like you would get with a sample and hold attached to a noise source.
That's what they call correlated. Sort of, its future states are dependent on its present state, as opposed to being completely undeterminable.
And as we turn the steps here, you can see the LEDs around the laboratory oscillator showing you how many stages you're working with.
When I first saw that, I thought that was pretty slick.
Pretty proud of that.
I felt a little warm behind my ears.
Oh, excellent. Did you have that?
Then it wore off.
Oh.
The second time through, it was like...
Let's see.
It stayed cool, just, bored easily.
Sure. The CV output of this can be quantized or not quantized, depending on your purpose. And it's very simple, but it's a nice addition. This was sort of kind of built into the original Voltage Research Laboratory, but it was sort of added after the fact, and it was very hidden, and it didn't really have any controls associated with it. So this brings everything kind of out to the panel with a new algorithm that hopefully creates something interesting. Now you do have an analog sample and hold in addition to this that is normal to the noise, so you can get, if we switch the CV to that, you get the sample and hold, that actual randomness that you would get out of that is available.
And that sample hold defaults to being held by the clock frequency of the top section, but can be patched externally as well. So for instance, every time an envelope generator finishes, you could make a new sample if you want to generate a new sample every time you articulate a loudness or something like that.
Perry's watching. Hi, Perry.
Hi.
You're supposed to be off today.
Go to bed, it's past your bedtime.
Go to bed. You know how to do this already.
Head on the pillow. Close your eyes.
Perry joined us in Super Booth, helped us explain this to a lot of people. Perry also had a huge part in the design of the Voltage Lab, in the sense that we gave him the ridiculous task of sort of taking the rough designs that I would put on the PCBs and sort of going through every section and fine-tuning it to be musically and sonically satisfying. In which case he did a tremendous job.
Bang up, not bang down.
Nicely done. Okay, so we're an hour and a half in. I think it's finally time to talk about the touch controller, which is the bottom half. So we'll move our little oscilloscope here out of the way. And
We're gonna go dry.
yeah, I think what we should do is
Undo
rip
the
up
patch.
the majority of this and start over with something that we can just focus on what we're doing with the touch controller, because it'll get chaotic enough on its own. It does not need the additional complexity.
What we do want. Let's go into the outputs mode. Let's still do the splitting.
Let's try to do this with small cables here. So we'll do this.
Wait, don't you want that coming out of the splitter?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Sure do.
It's a good thing we're patching on the buddy system.
It's a good thing.
Hey buddy, you sure you want to patch like that? There you go.
That's a good patch.
A, B. Great.
Okay. Let's find dynamics and pitch. Okay. Let me sort of zero this out here for the moment. In fact, we will do that. Totally clear it out. So the touch controller is, both of these are Eurorec modules. They're 90 HP Eurorec modules. They're completely independent of each other. They don't interact under the panels at all. Everything happens above the panels. So what you patch is what you get, I suppose. Again, if you have any questions as I go along, please feel free to ask them in the chat, and I will make sure that I answer them as I go through this. The touch controller is a 2-channel controller, where we have the red channel and the yellow channel. Each channel has a dedicated set of inputs and outputs. Here's your red, here's your yellow, and then you have some a clock, shared inputs with your clock, and then you have your MIDI in and out, because this does produce MIDI and it does enjoy MIDI inputs.
Consume.
It does consume them.
So right now you have it in which mode?
So right now we are listening to the yellow channel, and it's the yellow channel. I typically use that one first because the knobs are on the bottom. And as I press through, you see it's turning on the red and yellow channels, because over here, where you can select what you're working on, you can select red or yellow. If I select just yellow, just affects the yellow. If I select red.
And we're not using any of the red outputs right now, so they're not having any effect on the sound.
Exactly.
Is exactly why we're not hearing anything, because we're not, the yellow channel isn't active, and that's the only outputs we're using are the yellow outputs.
Exactly. And now I've selected both red and yellow. Make it easier to see, so we're affecting both channels at once. However, because you can interact with each one of these channels independently, these channels are completely independent of each other, except for the shared clock. However, in sequencer mode, they can run at different clock divisions, and the steps can have individual clock lengths, so the sequences can be quite independent of each other. But we'll get there. So, we are working with the yellow channel. Everything I say for this will match the red channel, but we're going to go through the yellow to make it easy. You can see. So as we tap through this now,
and right now we're not using any sustain information, because we're taking that information isn't passing into the dynamics controller. For people at home wondering why holding the key down doesn't keep the sound up.
Exactly. There are several ways that you can manipulate. You can utilize the outputs. So right now we have it patched out of the pitch output. The pitch output is a quantized output that is set to the key and scale of your choice. I think right now I have it set to D minor, although the oscillators aren't tuned, so it doesn't really matter.
And those keys and scales are choosable by menu strokes that correspond to the yellow and white legends on the surrounding the touchpads.
Yeah, so if we wanted to change it, we could simply do key and scale. You can see it's D minor is selected right now. D is written right here, and minor is written right there. And you can, the LEDs show you which ones that you're.
And that means both the red and the yellow scales are D minor.
Yeah, but again, you could set them to different scales and different keys if you wanted.
Hell yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
All day. All day. We also have a CV output, which ignores the key and scale. And in fact, it takes the raw voltage.
So and it's live too, which means that you can tune it while you play. So you set up a sequence and you're not quite sure if you love your melody yet, you can tune it on the fly.
Yep.
Instead of thinking that you know what it is in advance, you can play with it as it plays itself.
And that's a very analog 0 to 5 volts.
Very analog.
And then the third CV output available is the pressure output. This again is a 0 to 5 volt output. This is available again for both. Each channel has their own set of outputs. We're just playing with the yellow now.
And of course you can patch that pressure voltage anywhere you like. Right now Rick's got it patched to pitch so that it's really super obvious what it's doing.
Exactly.
But it could go to volume, it could go to timbre, so that you can, have a subtle control over timbre with the pressure voltage.
Yeah. So we'll jump back to pitch. And talk about now the trigger options you have. We can start with a trigger. This is a very short trigger that you can use to
ping the low-pass gates, which is what we're doing now, going into the pluck setting of the dynamics controller.
And that is that's always available and pays no attention to what I'm going to explain to you now.
That's one trigger per channel.
One trigger per channel. Now we have this third row here that we've been not talking about on purpose, which is the blue row. This is your CV channel.
Just like the wallflower row where everybody ignores it, it's actually super important.
Yes. And this blue row is shared by both red and yellow. Although again, because red and yellow can be on different channels at the same time, they're not necessarily utilizing the same value at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But the blue channel offers 3 independent outputs per channel. The first one is gate. Let's turn up the dynamic CV here. We'll turn our pluck off. And you can see that this stays on as long as I have it pressed, and turns off when I move my finger. Pretty simple. While the sequencer is running, what this does is this will set, the knob then will set the gate length. So this would be very short trigger all the way up to, I believe, 95% of the clock length. Mm-hmm. So you can output very different gate lengths as you cycle through in your sequence.
Right, which would correspond, for instance, to different note lengths in a sequence. A very short note followed by one that was more quarter note-y or 18th, 16th note-y, or hell, 18th note. 17th note. 17th. Right, it's smooth. There's no, you don't have to divide by 2.
Exactly. And then the next option, so that's our gate output. The next option over is an envelope. This is an analog envelope. It's a decay envelope. Now, the gate, the envelope, and the next one I'm going to talk about, again, are all available simultaneously, and you have independent ones for both red and yellow. This is the decay envelope, so you can see here it's very short.
That's a real extra, as they say in the movie business. This business about having a little envelope available from the blue channel is kind of nice because you can use it in a lot of different places without busying up your fancy function generators, which you can use for more complicated tasks.
Exactly. And this is an analog envelope. So you do get a nice analog envelope. And then we have a CV value. And this is, again, a 0 to 5 volt CV value. This value is digital, so we are going to get
oh, it gets quantized in between strokes, right?
It does. It's 4,096 different levels. So it's essentially 0 to 5 volts.
Pretty darn smooth. If you thought you could turn a knob in 4,096 separate intervals, you'd be cheating the knob.
Yes.
So that's effectively a whole extra set of outputs that'll go simultaneously out of the yellow and red channels, but are tuned by the blue knobs.
Yes. Very true.
All for the cost of the low cost of whatever this thing costs. No,
Yes.
I think it's great that you have the red and yellow channels, but you also get a sort of surplus. Well, not surplus. What's the word? Bonus. Bonus. But wait, there's more, as they used to say.
Yes. And speaking of more, before we get into talking about the sequencer and all that, we have a few more inputs and outputs to talk about. The first one is a scan. So this would be a way of creating maybe a...
I like to do it with a low frequency triangle. Oh, you can do that too.
So what it's doing is
as it rises and falls, it'll scan left to right through the sequence. Sorry, I stole your thunder.
That's okay. It assigns every step in the controller. It assigns a voltage value. So this would be 0 volts, step 1, to 5 volts, step 16, and everything in the middle. And then as the voltage changes, it jumps to the appropriate step. So this is, we're giving it an LFO here, but you can give it a random voltage or a bit of more chaotic voltage, and it would help you jump around. Now this...
And you could do this simultaneously to clocking it normally as well. So you can have the normal clock frequency trying to scroll through the standard left to right business where it goes left to right and then hops back to the beginning, but then you're also scanning it, which I like to do. I think that's fun.
Yeah, or you can play it simultaneously.
Yeah.
It tries to fight you. It'll win.
And if you set an 8-note sequence or a 7-note sequence, then it'll divide that scanning up smoothly between the 7 positions or the 16 or however many you choose.
Yes.
That's loads of fun.
Loads of fun. The remaining inputs relate to the sequencer, so we will go over them in a bit.
But also, in addition to the scan, you've got standard reset as well, so that you immediately jump back to the beginning of the sequence if you want to do that too. So every time you have a quick transition high, it'll jump to the beginning of the sequence no matter what.
Yes, I said I would cover that when we cover
sorry.
the sequences.
I thought you were going to... Okay, never mind. Sorry. You're right. Okay, that's good.
Okay.
Keep going.
Are you sure? Okay. So let's talk about, right now as we play through with our finger, the pitch is determined by the yellow knob. And this is great if you have some unconventional sequence you want, or if you just want to tap through the notes left to right or right to left or whatever you want to do. But if you want to use them in more of a keyboard sense, you can switch to keyboard mode here, and now you have the notes set up chromatically. What that means is the pitch output, the quantized output, outputs the actual note, while the knob then sets the analog 0 to 5 volt CV completely independently. So you can, these are not related at all. You can use them for two different things. This could be, say, the dynamics amount if you're using it as a filter cutoff.
So the quantized pitches will go out on the pitch output, and the CV output will reflect the knob positions independently.
Yes. Yes, they will. So we will switch that back to knob mode. And as you can see, the way I'm jumping around, I'm doing these menus. It's very easy. There's an edit button. You just press and hold the edit button, and you can see all the yellow text written here and written above. There's some white text, and you basically just select what you want to edit. In our case, we were selecting, say, key and scale. We can do, say, C, major, minor, D, and it just sets it. And when you let go of edit, you're good to go. So now let's talk about the sequencing. And this thing is incredibly deep as far as sequencing goes. Oh, before we jump to that, if you, again, because red and yellow are two independent channels, two independent things, one could be running a sequence while you perform with the other one. That's totally fine. I'm going to keep both active, just makes it a little easier to see the LEDs. But remember that this could be just one channel that we're messing with. So we'll turn the sequencer on up here.
In fact, we're only using one channel right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we have set up our sequence here. We turned our sequencer on, and we will hit run stop, and you can see our sequence is now running. We can pick some steps. Now we do have we're using the envelope output, so this is the analog envelope going into Dynamics CV input. Into the low-pass gate, we're not using the pluck at all, so the gate length, the envelope is entirely determined by this blue channel.
So some of the envelopes are going to be longer than others depending on the settings of the blue knobs.
Exactly. I think that sounds fun. And again, if you want to turn steps on, you just have to touch them. And touch them again to turn them off. Easy, easy, easy. Very performative. This touch controller really was designed for me as a live performance controller. So it's meant to be very hands-on, and it's meant to be very direct. So this is the most basic way to use it. Let's talk about some of the options we have. We have octave up and octave down. This allows us to cover the entire 9-octave range. The knobs, the pitch knobs, can be set to different ranges. Right now they're set to 2 octaves, but you can set them to 2 octaves, 3 octaves, or 4 octaves. I feel like 4 octaves is a lot to have as the range of the knob. I typically keep them at 2 octaves, but whatever makes you happy is what you should do. And again, those could be set differently for red and yellow if you wanted to.
So for instance,
yourself crazy.
Well, but realistically, you may want to run a bass line on the yellow sequencer and something more troublesome on the red. So you may have a significant octave jump between the two of them.
You could. And to do that type of thing, you could just modify.
So you would octave down the yellow channel and octave up the red to separate them a little bit?
Yeah.
That seems like a really real-world use case.
I think you're right. That's true. So we have a reset, which you can press, and that will reset the active channel that you have selected. Right now we have red and yellow selected. You also, as Michael mentioned earlier, prematurely, have a reset input for each of the channels. So we can use an LFO to reset our sequence.
Right now I'm just using the LFO to reset, which is mean.
That's fun. I don't think we're gonna hatch every possible thing you can do with the touch controller in, I think, or we would be here another 3 hours. But we'll go over, let's talk about all the features, certainly. You have, just working down here, sort of working our way around, we'll start with step length. What step length does is that allows you to set the length of a single step of a sequence. So if we wanted to change this first step, we can set it from 1 to 16 steps long. And again, what we're doing is we selected step length and we selected the step, and now you can see the LEDs are showing us the length of that step. And I'm gonna have it set to something reasonable. We'll have it set to 4 here.
And the white knob acts as a kind of an encoder for a bunch of these settings of this type.
Exactly, and it does say value, and this is your value knob. That's why it's white, because it doesn't represent any specific red, blue, or yellow channel. But as you can see, the step 1 now takes 4 steps instead of the 1 that it would normally take. We can go to step length, select 1, and change it back. And we're good again. So next we have step jump. Now step jump is very interesting, and what I will do is we'll make the pattern a little bit easier to follow here. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell step jump to say, after step 8, jump back to step 1. And now you can do this in a % of the time. So think trigger conditions, like I want it to jump back to step 1 30% of the time, or 22% of the time, or 90% of the time. Or I want it to jump back the 3rd of every 3 times, or the 1st of every 2 times. And there's a very easy way to display this, so I will show you how to do that. So we'll do edit, step jump, and we're gonna pick step 8. We're gonna jump to step 1, and then again, we'll use this value knob. Now, as the bar goes up, these are percentages that it'll happen. There's a lesser percent, there's a more percent, and then we jump to 1 out of 2, 2 out of 2, 1 out of 3, 2 out of 3, 3 out of 3. And you can go up into the 4s as well, but we're gonna stick to 3 out of 3. So the 3rd time out of 3 loops, it will play the second half, and we'll see what that does now. Interesting. We can change that to a percentage. This is about 50%, but does have a life of its own. So that's a really interesting way to make very long sequences using just 16 steps. Because if you think about it, every single step can have one of these step jumps associated with it, which gets very tangled very quickly because they start to interact with each other and the patterns start to get incredibly complex. So that is that. We'll select this. Let's just turn it off so we get a normal sequence again. Then we have step roll. Now step roll is your ratcheting. So we'll pick step 8 here. We can set the number of ratchets we want per step. You can hear that. Switch that back down to 1 to turn it off. You can change the first step of the sequence. That would be when you hit reset or when you start the sequence, the step that it starts on. It doesn't necessarily have to be step 1. It could be any of the 16 steps. We can also very easily clear anything we want to by hit edit, clear, and then just tap what we want. We'll clear both sequences just for fun here.
Cleansing.
Hit clear. Put a new sequence up. We have mutes, so we do edit, mute, mute. And now we have, you can see the channels are blinking. That means that we are muted at the moment. You can unmute those. And now we have individual step conditions. So like the jump conditions where you can specify a percent chance or a sort of a pattern that it does the jump, you can do the same with whether the note triggers or not. So we'll just do step condition. We'll pick step 8 again, and we'll say, here's our percentages. And again, here's our conditions: 1 of 3, 2 of 3, 3 of 3, 1 and 4, or 1 and 3 of 3, you know, so they're all, those are there. We'll just set it to, say, around 50%. And now, about half the time, this note will trigger, and half the time it won't. Pretty simple. We'll turn that off just by turning it down. For the moment, we will skip step chance and jump around. So we'll just talk about some of these. Like you can, we'll turn the sequencer off for a moment. You can load and save sequences. So if you're going to use this as a performance sequencer, you may want to have some sequences in the bag that you can rely on as part of your set, and you can save and load up to 16 sequences times 2 because you have the red and the yellow. We have our top row settings here. What that covers is things like the direction of the sequence, whether it be forward, reverse, or random, the range of the knobs, 2, 3, or 4 octaves, the keyboard mode, whether it plays chromatically or whether it uses the knobs for pitch, and then your clock source, whether it be internal, mini clock, or external, and then one-shot mode. What one-shot mode is if you have the sequencer running, you need to get a trigger into the one-shot input, and it will pass through the sequence once until it gets another one-shot trigger, in which case it will do it again. And then over here we have our chance effects. Now what chance effects are, they utilize these knobs here at the far left, the chance knobs. There's some different algorithms in here to create randomness. There's four destinations that you can enable or disable for the chance. One is the pitch, where it will jump around, and that'll be the chance that it'll play the pitch you've selected or some variation of that. You have whether the note will trigger or not. You have note shift. What note shift is that every note can shift up to 50% before or after the beat. And this will just
So that's a shift in time.
A shift in time, yes. So that randomizes that. And then you have roll, which would be your ratcheting, and that would randomize the ratcheting that you can do. And again, we can just select our top row. We can turn all of these on if we want. And that we have our chance knob here now assigns the amount of that
on all of the selected effects. All of the selected chance effects are now controlled per channel by the chance knob
exactly
leftmost in the row.
Exactly. And this does have a CV input, so you can voltage control the amount of chance. We'll turn on some more steps here.
Effectively, voltage control over the knob position.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. This becomes then an attenuator for the incoming CV. If you have individual steps that you don't want to participate in the chance for whatever reason, that's where the step chance comes in, and that just allows you to enable or disable these steps. You can see I disabled them all, so they're all ignoring it at this point. We've just enabled these to listen to it. By default, they're all enabled. You can go in and turn those on and off as you want to. Let's go through, we'll turn those off. Get back to a normal sequence here. Let's see, like I talked about key and scale, if you want to do microtonal stuff, this does a great job of microtonal. It'll do up to 32 notes per octave. And that's equal temperament. You can do 1 note per octave up to 32 if you wanted to do that. Obviously, if you do 32 notes per octave, you don't get a full octave on the keyboard. You get a half octave, but you can, with the knobs, get the full range.
But I thought you liked that. If you want 32 pitches in the, you might as well stay in one octave.
I suspect, yeah.
Because it's a really great octave.
Sure. You have quantize on and off. What that does is if you've played in some notes manually using keyboard mode into the sequence, they're probably going to be way off or somewhat off of the actual beat. Quantize will lock them onto the beat, which is very nice. Or if you have manually shifted notes, for example, we could do step shift for step 7 here. We can shift it before the note, or this is on the note, and this is after. So we'll shift it before a drastic amount, and you can see how it jumps almost. We'll just center that again. We have humanize. What humanize does is that sort of does that shifting, and it'll add sort of a random amount, and you can go from very subtle to all the way up to just chaotic.
That's super humanize.
Super humanize, yes. We have sequence shift. What sequence shift does, if you are in knob mode, it will shift the pattern of the gates. So you can see this, you can shift the sequence to the right or to the left. But the pitches are still tied to the knobs, so really you're just shifting the steps that are triggered. If you're in keyboard mode, it actually shifts both the pitch and the gate together, which gets mildly confusing to explain, but it's much easier to use than you would think. Euclidean generator generates the Euclidean pattern based on the length of the sequence you have selected. It tries to evenly fill the steps.
So if you have 6 steps, but you're trying to fit them into 5, you end up walking around the pentagon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then we have generate sequence, which creates an entirely new sequence where you can set the complexity, and it does that, and it utilizes all of these sort of sub-functions to create a hopefully very interesting pattern. And most of the time it does create a very interesting pattern.
Now say we've generated a sequence with generate sequence, but we want to go back to something else. How do we stop the generated sequence?
You could clear it.
Show how to clear that.
Okay. Well, if I generate a sequence, let's generate one.
Yeah.
We'll generate a sequence, and we'll say this sets your complexity with the CV knob or the value knob. So this would be not as complex, and this would be very complex. So we'll make one that's sort of very complex. And when it gets to the end of the sequence, you can see it created a new one for us. And maybe you hate this sequence.
I don't like this sequence.
You don't like it?
No, I like it fine, but let's clear it anyway.
Okay. So what we do is just do edit.
Just as an exercise.
Clear, yellow, and red. And now we've cleared the sequence, and we can recreate something here. We also have generate fill. What generate fill does is it takes the sequence and then it takes the active sequence and then augments it for one pass of the sequence. So essentially creating a fill for one loop. And then it goes back to the original. And clock division, each sequence can have its own clock division. You can set the CV channel chance, so you can assign the chance amount to the blue channel as well, in addition to what you can do with the red and yellow with the knobs over here. There's a way to assign it to the blue channel as well, so you can get varying chance of gate length and envelope length and that type of thing. The touchpad can be set to, if you're not using the pressure outputs, a lot of times I don't use the pressure outputs. But so, that's still a nice CV out. So you can assign that to a random, where at every step it will create a new random value and output that, which you can use for random things, which is nice. And of course you can set independent mini channels for the two channels. That is most of what this thing does.
Is that all it does?
Yeah, that's all it does. Oh my God, that's so many things. It does a lot of things. So let's see, how fast can you stand? Can you get into audio rate for something like a waveform generator?
No.
No.
But scanning it really fast will definitely break your idea. It doesn't get to audio rate, but it definitely breaks your perception of a sequence. Yeah.
So you can get to about there.
It starts to turn into timbre for sure.
Yeah. You start to sort of, if we go to trigger, it sort of starts to collapse on itself. So that would be as fast as it goes. Is that audio rate? No, not really. The power draw of each of the two units are the screw hole standard Eurorack, are the rails in case. Okay, I get the question. These are standard Eurorack modules. The holes are in the proper places to fit in a Eurorack case, so you can take this out and put it in a Eurorack case. The power draw of each one is very high. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it will be available in the manual. And there are no rails in this case, although it does have standard Eurorack power supply with two headers on it. So if your DIY skills are vaguely reasonable, you could certainly turn it into a Eurorack case pretty quickly and easily. Can you load the red and yellow sequences independently? Yes, you can. All you have to do is make sure you have the one you want to load selected. Not a problem. Double scanning, sure. Can you change the voltage division setting on the scope to give the wave more space? Oh, sorry.
That was probably like 30 minutes ago.
An hour ago, yeah.
Yeah,
we could have done that.
Could have done that, sure, it's not hard.
But we didn't.
Maybe.
So, the idea tonight was to go through this like 2 or 3 times, but we've been at this over 2 hours, and I feel like that's enough times. Once is enough.
No more Beatlemania, once is enough.
A few weeks ago, Luna gave us a rundown of the touch controller once the firmware was finalized, and we wanted to have her, because she had never done any sort of trade show, we wanted to have her sort of run through it for us to give her a little practice in sort of demoing things. And to be honest, I just like sitting in the shop and watching people demo things. It cracks me up. So she very diligently went through every section of the touch controller and answered our questions as we had them. And it did just that, took 2 hours. So I have probably glossed over some things because we did it in about 45 minutes as opposed to the 2 hours it took Luna. So, but the idea is that this thing is very deep, and there is quite a bit you can do with it. The same with the Voltage Lab voice itself. We talked about it for an hour and 15 minutes, and yeah, we went into relatively deep detail on what I consider to be the most important aspects of it. There was certain things that we glossed over. There was things we didn't talk about, like the splitter. It has a single input and 2 outputs. It's not terribly exciting, but if you need to split a signal, it's awesome. There's a mixer splitter where you have 2 ins and 2 outs. You can use it as a splitter. You can use it as a mixer. Again, not exciting, but a utility that you definitely want in a synthesizer of this type. So I think what I will do is if anybody has any other questions, I'll be happy to answer those over the next few minutes, and then we will shut this puppy down.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mentioned at the very beginning, if you were paying attention, we will go to bed.
Are there old questions we didn't get to?
What is your favorite knob on the system? Duke Atlas 21 asks. My favorite one is the time knob, because if I take the time knob off, it has a little heart. Oh, you can't see it. Let me move our heads out of the way. There we go. I took the time knob off, and it has a little heart and Pittsburgh under it. So that's my favorite knob.
Don't all the knobs have that?
No. For example, this coarse knob under Laboratory Oscillator 2, if I can get it, has your initials under it.
Why?
Because
I'm coarse?
You are coarse.
That's mean.
Well, we didn't have a harsh knob, so I had to pick coarse.
I had no idea you did this. So what else is there?
Well, I'm under the first coarse knob.
Oh, that's cute.
And Danielle is under tamper. Everybody that worked on the project
has
How
their
is it
initials. That I'm only just finding this out? I feel like I'm a plant, like I actually do know it, and I'm pretending to be excited, but I actually didn't know. That's cute.
Yeah, so everybody that worked on the project has their initials under the knob. Let's see who's under here. Oh, that's a no Vactrolls.
Oh, wow.
Graphic
That's
under
cute.
the Dynamics controller knob.
The thing is, though, if you try to change the knobs on the device, you get a poison in your hands that gives you a rash.
Yes, you do. You do. This is G1 here under the Dynamics controller.
That's cool.
Yeah, he did the layouts. Or I'm sorry, he did the initial firmware for it. Yeah, so I thought it was a fun way to celebrate just an incredible team. So that's my favorite knob.
The favorite knob is the part underneath the knob.
Yeah. What's the policy on stopping by the office for these local in Pittsburgh? We will have some, but not a ton. So reach out to us first.
Nobody wants to hear this anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to hear it anymore.
Nobody.
We don't have any currently. Actually, we have one, which is this one. But this is the only... No, we have one other one. We have two currently, but we don't have any for sale. They will be available later in June when the shipment arrives from the factory. Can you load the red and yellow knob sequencers independently? I already answered that one.
Yes, again?
Yes, again, still. What's the... Any more concrete info on when it's headed to retailers other than vague June? I'm going to go with vague June. It's on a boat right now. It's in a shipping container on the sea. If you're in the U.S., you'll probably get it before
We could be more specific. It's on the It's on the Pacific Ocean.
It is? Well, yeah. If you're in the U.S., you'll probably get it first. What happens is it'll go to L.A.
You could go to try to meet the boat.
And then,
No,
well...
you can't do that.
You can't, because then it gets to L.A. and it gets on a train and it goes to Minnesota.
Right.
And then it goes to the dealers.
The best way to think about it is that it's... think that it's going to take a long time and then be surprised that it's a little bit less than that.
Yeah. If you're in Europe, we're not sure how long it's going to take because we don't know if the boat is going to be able to go through the Suez Canal or if it has to go around Africa. The Horn, yes. And I suspect if you are in Europe, you understand what I'm talking about. And if you're not, it doesn't matter at all.
Because only Europeans need to know about the Suez Canal.
Yes. What are some weird and interesting examples of the way the Voltage Lab 2 changed over the course of its development? Well, originally it was exactly the same as the Voltage Lab, except it was slightly wider to account for manufacturing differences and to make it more manufacturable. That lasted about 10 minutes, I think. Another quirk about the Voltage Lab 2 is this was designed before Taiga, and it actually was prototyped before Taiga. But because Taiga was a smaller, sort of less complex instrument, we wanted to work on that one first.
Get it out the door first.
Yeah. And that goes back to the whole conversation about working with Create Audio and sort of understanding the processes. And it just made sense to do it that way. Someone had asked, is this going to be manufactured for a while? It will be manufactured as long as there is interest and as long as it is selling. Or if you are familiar with the Simpsons episode, where Troy McClure says, as long as it is financially viable. Yeah. Which Safari modules made it into the VL2? Well, there was the Flamingo. There was the Dynamics Controller BAT. There was the local Florist. There was the analog delay. And some of the local parks oscillator.
Right.
And that's about it. The Gibbon was a vague interpretation of the chant sequencer, although not really. And that's about it. Everything else is sort of on its own. We did the sequencer that we never released called the Bengal Tiger was sort of the practicing ground and the testing ground for the Touch Controller 2. That module...
The only thing that's left of the Bengal Tiger is the t-shirts.
Yeah. And we did make 40 of them, although we never finished the firmware, and I suspect that will definitely never happen. So, unless Luna gets really bored, and I can't imagine that's going to happen. So that's probably about it. James says he's late to the party. But did I mention if this is a limited release or part of the full lineup? No, this one will be available again as long as the demand is there. If everyone decides to wait 2 years to get one, we're not going to make that many. But if you guys like it and it keeps selling, we'll keep making it. That leads back to talking about like firmware as an example. The firmware in the Touch Controller is it's very flexible. So we're certainly looking for feedback from users, and we are more than happy to engage in, hey, wouldn't it be great if it did this? Yeah, it probably would. Or, hey, this is super broken. Yeah, probably is. But we'll fix that stuff. So we are looking to have a conversation with everyone about this thing to make it exactly what everyone hopes it could be. Now, the Voltage Lab 2 being 99% analog, there's not a whole lot that can be done with that. But with the chant sequencer and with some of the MIDI stuff, there's certainly room for poking around. Everything else is kind of just analog triggering of the circuits, and there's not a whole lot we can do with that. I had some crazy ideas sort of at the end, but I think they were just me being nervous about, like, is there enough? Is there enough? And clearly there's more than enough, but that is that. What are you each most proud of with the Voltage Lab 2? Michael, what do you think?
Most proud of?
Yeah.
I'll be proud if people use it.
It feels like a cop-out. Now,
Of course it's a cop-out. You put together all these things. I think of them as tools or flavors or offerings. They're potentially useful to people, but you never know if they're useful until people use them. And so the biggest compliment, the biggest thing I'd be most proud of is that somebody actually decided that this stuff was useful. You don't really know until it's in other people's hands. It's the user that completes the instrument. And I'm hoping for the user to complete the instrument a lot, to use the heck out of it. That's it's kind of honestly true. I mean, there are parts of it I think are sort of cool, and I'd like it if you thought they were cool, but I'd rather find out what you like. I mean, you, the user.
Me?
Now it's your turn to answer the question.
Oh.
See, I'm done.
I'm most proud that we did it, that it exists. Like, this is a project that we spent, 4 years directly on, but really this is, 6 or 7 years in the making. And
yeah, I wasn't really sure we were going to. The idea that there was going to be a second version of it after the first, I thought that might not happen. So it's kind of exciting that it did.
Yeah, because it was a monumental task, and for a teeny tiny team, for 95% of its life, there was 4 of us working on this.
Yeah.
And Luna coming in at the end, helping out with finishing the firmware. But this is a quite an undertaking. Now, the team at the factory were a huge help. The Create Audio guys were in the way most of the time. So everybody working together. The Create Audio guys did a great job too. So, but
I thought I heard that.
So everybody coming together and really allowing this vision that we had for this sort of really interesting instrument that's sort of a little bit left of center and a little bit quirky and a little bit weird in 2024 is what I'm most proud of.
I think it's actually fun too a lot of the time.
Yeah.
Like, I think it actually is fun to sort of explore on it. I keep finding things that are a little surprising to me, and I like to laugh. It makes me laugh sometimes.
James Green, his comment worries me a little bit, although I don't think he knows why. But he says, "Thanks, synth dads."
Oh. Yeah,
which is dangerously close to something else, but we're not going to get into that.
Well, you are welcome.
Yes. Dennis has been waiting patiently, and he's so thrilled it's out. And Bill just laughed. So I think that we're going to call it a night. If you are in the Pittsburgh area, or if you're coming through the Pittsburgh area and you want to check it out before it's available, please reach out to us. You're welcome to come visit us at the shop. We have it there. We'll turn it on for you, and we will let you poke at it. That's not a problem. We'll probably show you a couple other things, too. If you want to come visit, we're happy to have people come in. I feel like we have 1 or 2 groups of people in a week, and it's always nice to put down the soldering iron and chat with other synth nerds that are either from Pittsburgh or sort of passing through. That said, thank you all for tuning in. I may do a couple more of these in a very slightly different format over the next few weeks. I do have videos coming out where I'm going to very succinctly go over every section of the instrument as sort of like a series of short manual videos. But other than that, that is the Voltage Lab 2. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks very much for...
Yeah. So, bye everybody.
Bye.